All right, thank you for having me today. I'm going to walk through a gas utility perspective on some of these issues we've been talking about today and decommissioning, and walk you through some of PG&E's current activities and our strategy related to building electrification. To start, I think this is a really helpful chart to kind of level set on where we need to go to achieve California's carbon emissions. We have a number of legislative vehicles that codify different emissions targets. And the most aggressive one is the 2045 carbon neutrality commitment that the state has made. What you're seeing here is the carbon emissions of all the different sectors of the economy stacked on one another. And when you look into those, you see electricity has been declining rapidly over time as we've increased generation using renewable energy. What we're really trying to do as a state, and I think Becky mentioned this, is we're trying to leverage that progress on decarbonizing electricity to decarbonize both the transportation and building sectors. But you're going to have to achieve very, very large reductions in all sectors of the economy in order to hit these targets. PG&E's really tried to embrace these goals. We released a climate strategy report last year, which laid out our public vision for climate policy and some specific 2030 commitments that we're going to undertake. We committed to trying to achieve a net zero energy system in 2040, 5 years in advance of California's state goal. And by 2030, we have a number of targets related to generation of renewable energy, as well as inputting renewable natural gas into our system, accommodating lots of new electric vehicles on our system, electrifying buildings. And I think one that's not listed on the slide here today, but it's very pertinent to this conversation, is we've also committed by 2030 to evaluate all gas capital projects against an electric alternative and pursuing all electrification projects that are cost effective compared to the gas project. So we're going to have big cuts in emissions from the gas system in order to get to these goals. PG&E has a vision for our gas system to become an affordable, reliable, and safe energy delivery system consistent with our carbon neutrality goals. And to do that, we have 4 pillars of our strategy. The first 2 are my main focus for today, but we really need to decrease the cost of maintaining the natural gas system as we decline throughput. A couple of the speakers have talked about this. If we don't do those 2 things simultaneously, you're going to see very large spikes in gas rates for people. And I have another slide. I'll show you kind of how dramatic that can actually look. And then secondly is just decreasing the carbon footprint. So part of this is electrifying buildings and reducing throughput. Part of this is using decarbonized gases like RNG and potentially some hydrogen injected into the system. In addition to that, we're also trying to leverage the gas system to electrify to reduce emissions from hard to electrify customers. We know there are a number of large industrial customers in California who are still doing things like burning tires for heat. It's much less emittive to have a carbon-based natural gas used for their heating processes, rather than using like bunker fuel, tires, petroleum coke, those kind of things. So we can actually decarbonize by adding people to the gas system in some of those situations. And then finally, leveraging innovative financial mechanisms. We really need to start thinking about the long-term affordability of the system as we're making these decarbonization decisions. PG&E, for example, in our 2023 general rate case proposal, we proposed a change to our depreciation methodology for our distribution gas assets, which would allow us to collect more money for those assets in the near term while we still have a lot of throughput and customers on the system. And our collection of those depreciation costs would taper off over time. So in practice, we've split our thinking related to building electrification into new and retrofit buildings. New buildings is pretty straightforward. What we're trying to do here is avoid expanding the gas system. One way to maintain or to ensure we're not increasing costs on the system is to make sure we're not expanding the system. PG&E has supported over 50 local jurisdictions. I think it was Becky's slide showed a bunch of cities on the coast. well, almost all of them are in Northern California that PG&E serves, and we provide support letters for all electric new construction codes to any local jurisdiction that that is interested in our support. And we also supported the PUC last year when they looked to eliminate gas line extension allowances for new construction. Things get much more challenging when we start talking about retrofit electrification because the buildings are already served by the gas system, and we have an obligation to continue safely and reliably serving those customers using gas until we're told not to, either by the customer or by the Public Utilities Commission or by the legislature. So currently what we're doing today is we're really looking at device by device electrification in most cases. So this chart is probably familiar to a number of you. I think some of you in this room may have put it together. But essentially on the left-hand side, device by device, we're not getting rid of any gas infrastructure because all of those homes are still continuing to use stoves, for example, with gas, maybe a fireplace, maybe a backyard heater. We have to continue maintaining those lines because each of those homes has some remaining gas usage. We can move to whole building electrification, but that still doesn't actually help us a lot on the infrastructure side because we have distribution mains running through the middle of streets with very small connections running to the homes. If a few of those homes on like a cul-de-sac, for example, would electrify, you might be able to remove some of those small services, but you're still going to have to maintain the large distribution pipe that's in the middle of the road. The final way we're looking at is zonal and targeted electrification. We differentiate between these two in terms of cost effectiveness. So for us, from our perspective, targeted electrification is cost effective, meaning we can pay for it with the cost of a capital upgrade on the gas system. And zonal electrification is looking at larger zones where it may not be cost effective, but we're trying to electrify for either GHG reasons, cost reasons, equity reasons, something along those lines. To illustrate the challenge in terms of rates of not doing this in a more zonal fashion, this is a chart that was put together by E3 a few years ago, but we've done a number of internal studies that kind of have results that look very similar to this. Without a managed transition, you could see 10 to 20 times the gas rates that you see today for remaining customers on the system in 2050. That is independent of the cost of gas commodity. I'll just remind folks that PG&E and other investor-owned utilities in California don't make money off of selling commodities like natural gas. We make money off of investing in infrastructure. So the commodity cost is a direct pass-through to our customers. So the recent gas rate spikes that we've seen have nothing to do with infrastructure costs. Or, well, I shouldn't say nothing. They primarily are not related to infrastructure costs. They're primarily related to commodity costs, which PG&E does not really control. But this is, I think, a key chart in making us understand that if we don't manage this transition, there are going to be some of our customers and some of our colleagues and neighbors who are going to be stuck with very, very high gas rates in the future through no fault of their own, simply through a fault of long-term planning and us not getting it right along the way. So currently what we're doing, as I said, is kind of, we're looking at device by device electrification, then we're sort of moving up to whole building electrification occasionally. We're then occasionally doing these targeted projects where we can pay for them with gas costs, and then we're doing zonal at the end. We have a few pilots we're imagining and things like that, but we've never really done zonal electrification at scale. For the gas system, what we'd really like to do is see that pyramid inverted. So we'd really like to see zonal electrification being kind of the main thrust of policy of the state so that we're able to reduce cost on the system as we're moving forward, with occasional appliance by appliance when necessary in order to reduce carbon emissions. The question of propane was raised earlier. I think from our point of view, propane can still be useful for allowing us to remove gas assets for a small number of customers who might still be able to be served by propane. And also, I think there's a strong argument to be made that our state dollars should be targeted at propane customers initially because they have higher GHG emissions than people using natural gas, and they're not actually connected to the natural gas system. So removing them from, fully electrifying them will not have negative consequences on remaining gas customers. So real quick, this is how we think about electrification projects in terms of cost and scale. So on the left-hand side is the types of projects PG&E is doing today, and I'll talk a little bit more about this. But on the left-hand side is targeted electrification using what we call expense dollars. Utilities function in accounting terms with capital dollars, which are long-term investments, and expense dollars, which are paid in the year that they're incurred. So as it stands today, PG&E can run electrification projects using expense dollars. So we would have a gas capital project, say $1 million. As long as we can electrify the buildings that are served by that gas infrastructure for under $1 million, we can pursue that project using expense dollars. We would increase the scale a little bit by converting those expense dollars to capital dollars. That would allow us the cost effectiveness calculation to be much more favorable in the year that the project is conducted, spreading those electrification expenses over time rather than in the first year incurred. Again, I'll talk a little more about that. And then the final area is zonal electrification, where the scale can be very, very large, the impact can be very, very large, the number of customers can be very, very large, but the cost also is very large associated with that. So today, PG&E is doing targeted electrification using expense dollars, and we have for a number of years. What these projects typically look like are what's shown on the screen here, a very long length of pipe to serving very few customers, and that pipe needs to either be replaced or repaired. So say it's $1 million project, and we have 5 customers at the end. If we're fully paying for all 5 of those customers to electrify, it still makes sense for us to do it because it's less costly than the capital project. We've done about 102 electric conversions using this tactic. It's avoided about 80 high pressure regulator rebuilds on our system, and those typically are about $150,000 to $300,000 a piece. So these are real cost savings on the gas system. What we have learned through this experience is there are 3 primary barriers to doing these types of projects. The first 2 are interrelated. Obligation to serve, Becky talked a lot about this. Customer acceptance and agreement. She also talked about that. One customer could sink an entire project here. One customer at the extreme, one customer wanting to keep just their stove could sink this entire project because we are obligated to continue serving gas to that customer. The third one is cost. In order to do these projects at scale more broadly, we can't continue asking gas customers to continue funding all of these projects. It's just not sustainable, especially when we see the longer term trend towards decreasing throughput and increasing rates. Throwing more money onto gas customers' bills in order to electrify larger zones is only going to increase that trend more dramatically. This is an example of the second technique I was talking about. So converting those electrification expenses to capital rather than expense dollars. We propose to do this at CSU Monterey. It's currently pending application in front of the Public Utilities Commission. We inherited this pipe from the Army Corps of Engineers. It's in pretty bad shape and we need to replace it. We've proposed to electrify almost the entire campus at an expense of about $19 million compared to the gas capital project of $20 million. And we've requested the commission allow us capital treatment of those behind the meter expenditures to make sure that the project remains cost effective. Otherwise, it will not be. And we'd like to see that technique expanded to all cost-effective projects so that we really can increase the scale of the type of work that we're doing today. And then the final type of work that we're looking at is this zonal electrification approach. We've had more trouble doing this because of the barriers that I noted, but we have a few things that are foundational to getting us to do this activity more broadly in the future. First, we proposed in our energy efficiency application last year to do 3 $5 million zonal electrification pilots. These will be located in disadvantaged communities in order to allow us to start electrifying customers who are at the highest risk of having affordability challenges in the future. And we've set up a fairly sophisticated GIS-based tool to allow us to identify high potential zones for electrification in the future. So this tool layers in information about the infrastructure on the gas system, our customers and our customer usage environmental risk factors like earthquakes and fire, as well as propensity to electrify for different customers. On top of that, we put our gas capital projects that are known at the time so that we can start identifying zones that could also offset projects. We share a tool, a version of this tool with local governments under non-disclosure agreement with some of the confidential information layers stripped out of it. But nonetheless, we provide it to those local governments in order for them to be able to help work with us on planning these projects over the long term. So for example, if a city had a repaving project that was coming up in a specific zone, they could look at this tool and see if PG&E also has a gas capital project in that same area and try to overlap the two together to save cost. So that is kind of the sum of PG&E's activities currently in electrification. Happy to answer questions as they come.